I think we have another poll. What are your biggest concerns running cloud data warehousing? And select all that apply. So again, I think we're going to give 30 to 60 seconds for this. The choices are security, governance, cost, performance, and other. And if you want to use a Q&A to write in some answers for that, that would be great as well. Kind of reflecting back on that prior poll where we had a bunch of folks had responded that they were both they were hybrid. They were both on-prem and in the cloud. What do you guys think? 10 seconds. What do you think of what that actually means? Let's go to you, Mark, first.
Yeah, I mean, that is that is no surprise to me. I think particularly in the markets that we serve, I think banks and financial services are taking a very considered approach to what they move to the cloud, and there'll be hybrid configurations will be here for a long time to come. Richard, your thoughts?
Oh, I agree. The concept of just being purely in existence in a single cloud is very, very limited. I mean, there will be applications that reside in a single cloud, but for data compliance reasons, hybrid clouds or multi-clouds or hyper-clouds, thank you, those are going to be the way forward, simply for data security and resilience.
Thanks. Before we go to the results, just a reminder to the audience, if you've got questions you'd like to ask Richard or Mark, please put them into the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. And let's take a look at this result. Okay, well, cost seems to be the leader here with almost 43%. Does that surprise you guys?
To some degree, the cost, as in, is it going to be more expensive than I think it is? Yeah, then that's no surprise. Yeah, it will be.
Yeah,
yes,
it's interesting. What do you? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, David. Cost is always the number one selling point for cloud migrations. It very rarely comes out when you finally do the washing at the end of the installation that you've achieved those substantial savings of costs that you'd like to, but all the drag-ons like security and governance is important. I'm interested to note that actually performance is the lowest.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, your thoughts about that.
Well, actually, I just want to pick up on, because I made a superficial comment about cost being more important, but I actually, there's quite a nuanced thing I just quickly want to mention here is you've also got to balance it with the return on investment when you move to the cloud here. And what you find out is when you're creating more use cases, creating things that are going to develop more business value, you might find that your cloud expenditure in data warehousing does go up, but the business returns are higher and obtained faster. So I've had plenty of conversations with financial services exactly around that idea. They're prepared to pay more in the cloud because they believe that the prerequisite kind of return on investment is going to be a lot higher.
Thanks, guys. Actually, Mark, you made a comment before about that led me to think about some of the use cases, particularly real-time analytics use cases. I think you made a reference earlier about real-time fraud prevention. I think the answer to the prior question before the poll, you also made a reference to real-time. So what emerging real-time analytics use cases are you seeing in the industry?
Well, I think the big two are kind of customer experience and also kind of that fraud protection, fraud prevention side of things as well. So I'm seeing banks who want to have a much more immersive experience, a better understanding and a better model of their customers, knowing full well that increasingly the way that we interact with them is through a web browser or a mobile application or something like this. And but what I'm very curious to see emerging is just the new sort of data sets that are coming in play and being integrated to feed some of these predictive models around it, because it's not all about sort of traditional demographic data now. It's the social media sort of component to this. Which customers have an influence on other customers of mine? How can I measure the response rate of a particular campaign? Is geolocation a factor in how they do digital banking, for example? And I think this kind of way of interacting with customers, being able to put targeted in the moment offers to them based on their behavior and their journey is extremely important.
Thanks. The topic of our webinar is de-risking, and I wanted to kind of ask a little bit about your thoughts about different types of risks. And of course, we know that there's the standard types of risks that are in the financial services industry. Many of them around Mark, what you just talked about making sure that the customer has a consistent and meets the expectations for the customer experience. Real-time fraud prevention, but there's also the compliance issues having to do with know your customer or anti-money laundering. We're all familiar with that, but we know the financial services organizations have always depended heavily on technology. And are there new technology risks that are emerging from cloud migration? Richard, thoughts?
Oh yes. Sorry, I was waiting for my name there, David. Do apologise. Yes, I think there are. I mean, splitting the risks up from technical risks on one aspect to financial risks on the other aspect. Let's look at the technical risks. You have many advantages to running in the cloud. You can ameliorate risk or remove a lot of risk using a cloud or a multi-cloud provider, certainly in terms of hardware failure, broadband pipes going down, the usual things that everybody has to think about. Not just the resilience of it, but recovery, of course, can be achieved an awful lot faster by having the advantages that a cloud-based solution will buy you. I'm less sure that there's any changes to the risk as associated with the risk in the financial community, such as portfolio management risk and counterparty risk and that sort of thing. That's design, platform, and implementation of the system. But there is a place that the regulatory authorities do have a vested interest. If an institution must report on its exposure, either on an instrument or institution basis, then this has a temporal aspect. The regulator or even higher management will want, need, or must provide this information in minutes or, at best case, hours. This then goes back to the technical risk. You have to have the system up. It has to be up, running, and performing queries, or at least those queries pertinent to the regulator or senior management. A single on-premise system can't ever provide this guarantee. Yes, we talk in terms of 99.999% uptime, but that's a mathematical figure. Something happens, something goes wrong. That's the 0.0001% of the chance. And nowadays, certainly with the regulator and certainly with some of the new regulations coming online, that's just not permitted. So you have to go back to duplicated systems on duplicated locations if you're on premise. But in the cloud, an awful lot of those advantages are bought as soon as you take a cloud solution on. The other perspective that we talked about cost, you've got to bear in mind that the cost for once it's implemented, the cost for an on-cloud solution is not capital expenditure anymore. It's purely operational expenditure. You need to upgrade the systems, fine. The cloud provider upgrades the hardware on the solutions. You don't even see it happening. You might get charged a little bit more money on a per monthly basis or a per annual basis, but you haven't had to spend $250,000 or $500,000 on a new bunch of hardware. So the type of costs that an uncloud solution has are different to those ones on an on-premise solution.
So, Mark, I preempted you to go to Richard, but it sounded like you had an answer that you wanted to share as well about the emerging risks that are emerging, technology risks.
Well, you kind of teed it up at the top of the call in your slides, David, around cloud concentration risk, and I do have quite a few conversations with financial services institutions that are concerned about when they move to the cloud. if they go with a single cloud, what does that mean from an operational and systemic risk perspective? If that cloud becomes unavailable for any length of time, and they've got their settlement and payment systems all running on that cloud, what's the business impact? And then, the financial regulators are concerned when lots of banks use the same particular cloud, for example. Is there a kind of a systemic risk to the broader system for outages on one particular cloud? And so, that's the conversation I have about how they can kind of mitigate that risk around either hybrid cloud solutions or looking at multi-cloud solutions and spreading some of the risk about.
Mark, let's switch gears a little bit. You mentioned customer experience. I mentioned customer experience. I used the term omnichannel, I think. I think you also used a multi or omnichannel. Have there been changes in the ways that customers interact with the different financial services institutions? And are there particular risks that are emerging for the implementations that come from these expectations?
Yeah, and I think I touched on it a little bit earlier, where we're giving over more decision making to not rule-based model, but statistically based machine learning models for doing things like credit scoring and risk evaluation. And of course, there's an inherent risk there. Not only are we taking advantage of our ability to integrate more data to feed and train these models are becoming more complex. And then when you start to go down to the kind of deep learning side of things, then you start to get into a realm where model explainability becomes, very, very important. How you can weed out biases in the decisions that are being made by these automated models. Everyone wants that automation. They want to, take the time it takes to make a decision around the customer to the kind of think time around pressing the button on an application on their mobile, on their cell phone, for example. We want that, need that automation, but of course it comes with huge risks around how we can do these things without getting ourselves into trouble from a bias perspective.
So Mark, I'll throw one more question at you, and then I think I'm going to hand it back to Brenda for audience questions. For attendees that are currently developing their cloud strategy, what would you suggest as a number one aspect to consider?
As I think I've mentioned a couple of times, I think looking at it as an opportunity to redesign your entire ecosystem approach, I think is really important. This is a great opportunity to decide, if I'm going to do this again, how am I going to do it right, and what pieces are really important to me. I think it's also an opportunity to start to embrace new organizational changes around deploying in the cloud as well, because it's not just about technology. There's a people and process element that there's an opportunity to take a look at. And I think one kind of organizational approach and data management approach, if you like, that's getting a lot of attention right now are things like data mesh, where you kind of design data domains, keep the data close to the people that created it, make it their responsibility to maintain and govern that data and keep the quality of the data high, and have very clearly defined APIs between different data domains on how you exchange data and consume data. And I think a good thing to do is to consider how things like that data mesh strategy might fit around your overall cloud strategy and data management strategy as well. So those would be my thoughts.
Thanks. So, Brenda, I'm going to hand it back to you to field some of the audience questions.
Sounds great. Thank you, David. And thank you, Mark and Richard. So yeah, we'll go ahead and start with this one. I'll send it your way, Mark, and then Richard, if you have anything to add to it. I know you've touched on this a bit for sure, but someone's asking, what would you say are the top reasons that financial services organizations are making the switch to the cloud?
What are the top reasons that they're moving? I think it is to take advantage of new use cases. In some cases, it's a burn the ships approach, that they don't want their own data centers anymore. Other discussions I've had is they like the opportunity to be able to take advantage of data locality and data sovereignty, and make sure they adhere to things like GDPR and keep their data in the region and only in that region. So I mean, it's a mixed bag of a variety of reasons.
Perfect. Richard, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that what Mark said plus a couple of other ones is the moving of new applications to the cloud is inherently simpler, and it allows the customer to toe in the water just to test whether this is going to be a functional change that will be suitable for the organization. I think very few, if any, customers are prepared to just jump in with everything, the root and branch that we talked about earlier. I think it's selecting what application you want to do to see whether it works. I think we're still in the stage where some organizations are still dubious about the move to the cloud, and I think it's a testing process. The advantage, of course, you have with the cloud is you can start small and grow big.
Makes sense. Here's one for you, Mark. Someone's asking, can you give a specific example of how you helped a financial services organization address their pain points?
Yeah, sure. So one of our customers is a Yellowbrick data warehouse user, and they effectively standardize on us for their enterprise data warehousing needs across the entire corporation. They're a very well-known credit card company, and they had a huge data lake that they were using to support the data exploration and analytics, ad hoc analytics requirements for a lot of their data scientists and business analysts. And they weren't able to get the performance and the kind of real-time speed that they needed to ask these questions that they wanted of their kind of historical data of all of their financial transactions. And so they brought us in, and it's a multi-petabyte deployment. It's it satisfies their query SLAs, in many cases sub-second query response times. It simply was a much better price performance point than their previous incumbent solution.
Great. Here's one. I'll start with you, Mark, and maybe Richard has something to add to it. So someone's asking, I've been hearing from some vendors telling us that we don't need a data warehouse when we move to the cloud. How would you respond to that?
Right. I mean, yeah, I sometimes get involved in conversations where folks say, yeah, we're going to move and deploy on on something called a data lake house, which a few vendors are pushing, the kind of intersection of data warehousing and data lakes into this kind of data lake house concept. I'm a huge believer in the right tool for the right job. And if you're manipulating highly structured relational data, the best place to do that is in a dedicated database platform to do that. If you're looking at manipulating data which maybe has a little less structure to it that you want to apply structure to and pull out and tease out the structure out of it, then a data lake remains the same thing. And I think the companies that will be most successful and have that competitive advantage rather will be those ones that use the right tool for the right job. The data warehouse for the high performance, high concurrency reporting and analytics, and data lakes for doing things like data preparation and creating new data products.
Great. And Richard, do you have anything to add to that?
I think I would agree completely with that. I don't think even in existing organizations, any organization can say they have a data warehouse or a series of data lakes. Oh, I like data lake house. That's good. But yes, I think most organizations pick a name for their data store. Are they still going to need an individual single entry one-off data store? No, I don't think so, because I think the world is moving away from single data stores. I think there's very much more a requirement for not federated systems, but certainly distributed systems, improvement in reliance and all of that sort of thing. So I think, do we still need a data warehouse? Well, you might not call it that anymore, but you probably are.
Very good. All right, let's squeeze in this one last question. We'll just bounce back to you, Mark. Someone is asking, we would like to develop services that allow external parties to selectively access some of our data. How do you suggest any ideas on how we architect these services?
Right. Well, I mean, you've obviously got to look to the underlying platform that's going to serve these things. And, you know, one pattern that's kind of emerging across the industry is you really want to make it as simple as possible to access this data at low cost to the end user. And in fact, I mean, some vendors are not necessarily looking at that, and they're almost biting from two sides of the pie at once by, you know, offering a platform that has data sharing services. But by the way, your end users, that your partners that want to consume the data, will have to spin up compute resources to be able to access that and pay for it, or you will pay for it to deliver that. And so I think one approach is looking for platforms that even the sheer sort of approach of sharing data with partners is going to be extremely costly and unpredictable as well, as it usually would be in the cloud. And of course, alongside that is all of the data protection, the security, and the governance that comes around about establishing the identity of the third party that's going to be accessing the data, having proper access control policies in place to ensure that they only get the data they are allowed to see, putting in masking in place for data in mixed kind of data sets and things like that. So obviously there's a huge security and governance set of things that you need to think about, but you also need to think about the costs of serving this stuff up as well.